Let's get started. Welcome everyone and good evening. My name is Pablo Barrera. I'm the Curatorial Fellow at Oklahoma Contemporary's Exhibitions Department. I am of the Yatika people, an indigenous community in southwestern Mexico. And it is my great pleasure to host this panel and to introduce our incredible speakers tonight. Since I'm a recent to the state of Oklahoma, it's customary within my culture to begin any public presentation by showing respect to and recognizing the history of the land where I now have the privilege to live, work, and create, or more properly known as a land acknowledgement. So I want to begin by acknowledging that Oklahoma Contemporary stands on ancestral lands traditionally populated by the Wichita peoples. The Wichita Nation established villages and later shared the territory in mutual respect with the Comanche and the Osage nations prior to the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which forced the relocation of tribal nations to what was referred to as Indian Territory. Shortly after, these same lands were addressed by the Treaty of Okmulgee, signed at Fort Gibson in 1833, placing this area within the land chosen for Muskogee Creek Nation removal to Indian Territory as west and south of Cherokee lands, an area that also includes present-day Tulsa. A later treaty between the Muskogee Creek and the Seminole Nations, ratified in 1856 by the US Senate, promised a tract of Muskogee land to the Seminole Nation, land between the Canadian River to the south and the North Fork of the Canadian River, or an area roughly cutting across Oklahoma City from the northeast to the southwest. These treaties were betrayed during the post-Civil War Reconstruction era, paving the way for what would become known as the land runs prior to statehood, after which the city of Oklahoma City would be established. Today, Oklahoma Contemporary rests on a specific parcel of land near Automobile Alley, offering Campbell Art Park and art facilities to the public free of charge for exhibitions and related programming. I want to acknowledge the Kirkpatrick Family Foundation for recognizing the importance of keeping this land accessible for everyone in the city, making this part of the ongoing legacy of sharing this space. And since this is a virtual panel, I want to invite our audience to write in the chat feature where they are from so as to partake in the spirit of this virtual land acknowledgement. We'll take a minute for people to just type in their locations. And as you write in the chat, I just wanted to remind you to please mute your microphones if they're accessible, and also to just save all your questions for the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for later on in the panel. They will be sorted and answered toward the end of this talk. So tonight, Oklahoma Contemporary will be highlighting the valuable contributions from Native artists to contemporary art, specifically from our Bright Golden Haze and Shadow on the Glare exhibitions. Our speakers will reflect on the significance of tangible and metaphysical elements of light from an indigenous perspective, exploring thought-provoking ideas that inform and contextualize the context-specific elements that these artists examine in their practice. Native American art has gained traction across major museum institutions in the US and abroad. But these recent developments, though they may have caught national attention, are not new to Oklahoma. Oklahoma has been at the vanguard of Native art history studies, landmark exhibitions, and even the source of many of these celebrated artists that the rest of the continent is beginning to recognize. This panel is a logical and natural outgrowth of Oklahoma Contemporary's commitment to contemporary art, and will serve to critically examine how Bright Golden Haze and Shadow on the Glare's themes of light and place can be refracted through an indigenous lens. In Western culture, the use of light as a medium for contemporary artwork owes much of its scholarly status to the light and space movement of the 1960s. But there are traditions on this continent that developed well before the 60s, well before the United States, and especially well before academic language on light entered art historical canon. If we are able to appreciate the more intellectual underpinnings behind the works of famous figures within Oklahoma Contemporary's own exhibitions, such as Robert Irwin, James Turrell, or Oliver Eliason, then we are already well on our way to begin recognizing the indigenous epistemologies which inform how our panelists engage light. We've planned this evening with that complexity in mind, as an opportunity to engage ideas that are otherwise missed when choosing to look at contemporary art from one narrow and incomplete lens, the very same lens that overlooks this state and fails to capture its dynamic heritage in full. Tonight, Oklahoma Contemporary encourages our audience to engage Oklahoma as a crossroads, a place where beautiful communities have and will continue to contribute to art and culture. The individuals that will help us achieve that conversation include the following. Dr. Marianne Taigilogwa Nicolson is based in Kwayi Village, a Musgamak Zawadenok First Nations community at Kinkom, England, traditionally known as Kwakiutl to the Kwakwakwa peoples. Dr. Nicolson has degrees in fine arts, linguistics, and anthropology, and earned her PhD from the University of Victoria. She was awarded the Edeljor Contemporary Art Fellowship in 1999, and in 2010, Nicolson was featured in the Biennale of Sydney. In 2019, she received the Emily Carr University's Emily Award and the Fulmer Award of Distinction. Her work has been exhibited internationally, including the landmark exhibition Transformers, Native Art and Light and Sound at the National Museum of the American Indian, New York, Smithsonian. Her monumental public artworks can be found in the Canadian embassies of Amman, Jordan, and Paris, the Vancouver International Airport, and the cliffs of her traditional homeland in Kinkom Inlet, British Columbia. Nicolson now works as a Kwakwaka'wakw cultural researcher and historian, advocating for Indigenous land rights. You can see her work, Kankagoi, The Seam of Heaven, previously shown at the Seattle Art Museum as part of Oklahoma Contemporary's Bright Gold and Haze exhibition. Also featured in the Bright Gold and Haze exhibition is Yatika Fields, who joins us from the Res, now known as Tulsa, a city situated on lands designated to the Muskogee Creek Nation by the aforementioned 1833 Treaty of Okmulgee, which was recently upheld in the Supreme Court ruling McGirt versus Oklahoma. Fields began his formal arts education studying photography, painting, and sculpture through the Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute held at the University of Oklahoma from 1998 to 2000, followed by Oklahoma State University's landscape painting program in Siena, Italy that year. Fields received his painting degree from the Art Institute of Boston. He was an Urban Artist Initiative Fellow in 2009, a Native Creative Development Grant awardee in 2015, and a Tulsa Artist Fellow since 2017. In 2019, Fields was artist in residence at both the Research Center for Material Culture in Leiden and the Crow Shadow Institute of the Arts in Oregon. His work is held in collections of the Hood Museum at Dartmouth, the Oklahoma State Museum of Art, and the University of Oklahoma Sam Noble Museum. Fields currently is a Tulsa Artist Fellowship Arts Integration Awardee, and his monumental painting Eternal Sun, shown here, is featured in the Bright Gold and Haze exhibition. Joining us from the companion exhibition, Shadow on the Glare, is Keli Mashburn. Mashburn comes to us from the Osage Reservation, established in 1870, when the Osage Nation finally prepared for removal from canvas after having negotiated payment for 1.57 million acres of their former territory in present-day Oklahoma from the Cherokee Nation. Keli Mashburn studied philosophy at the University of Tulsa and at the University of Oklahoma before studying photography at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. Working in traditional darkroom methods since 1998, Keli Mashburn employs various experimental techniques to produce photographic prints from film, utilizing the tallgrass prairie as a metaphor and incorporating photography, projection, and sound. Her projects explore the ethereal realm between physical place and personal myth. Mashburn's works were also featured alongside Dr. Marianne Nicolson's works at the National Museum of the American Indian New York Transformers exhibition and internationally at the 57th Venice Biennale. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19 spikes in Oklahoma City, our Mary LaFleur Clements Oklahoma Gallery is closed for the remainder of the exhibition's run, which is set for November 30th, but we can enjoy images of her artwork throughout this talk. And finally, this panel will be moderated by the esteemed Dr. Heather Ahtone, Senior Curator at our neighboring institution, the First Americans Museum, scheduled to open next year. Dr. Ahtone is a member of the Chickasaw Nation, which was removed to Oklahoma Territory after signing the 1837 Treaty of Dokesville with the Choctaw Nation, which saw them purchase the right for the settlement of the Chickasaw people on their own district within Choctaw Territory. Dr. Ahtone is also descended from the Choctaw. She has degrees in creative writing, printmaking, art history, and a PhD in interdisciplinary studies in art history, anthropology, and Native American studies at OU. Dr. Ahtone has worked in the Native arts community since 1993. She has an established career as an acclaimed curator of art exhibitions, educator, and researcher/writer, exploring the intersection between tribal cultural knowledge and contemporary Indigenous artists. Dr. Ahtone's goal has been to develop an interdisciplinary approach to studying Native American art, and she continues to seek opportunities to broaden discourse on global contemporary Indigenous arts. She is committed to serving the arts community of Oklahoma and placing contemporary and Indigenous Native American art within the context of America's overall history and culture. So please join me in welcoming everyone. We are very excited for this overdue conversation. As a final reminder, please be sure to mute your microphones when not speaking and to type your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens. Now I defer to Dr. Heather Ahtone. Oh, Dr. Alton, you're muted.
I was being really eloquent there. I'm sorry you missed that.
That's fine.
Thank you, Pablo. That was a really generous introduction, and thank you for bringing us together this evening. You know, everything happens in its own time, and I appreciate that your vision held together for us, even in this, you know, tumultuous time with the pandemic and whatnot, to gather together. And I just want to express my gratitude to the Oklahoma Contemporary Arts Center for having the curiosity to ask, what might a few Indigenous artists add in conversation to an exhibition exploring the topic of light? And thank you to each of you in the audience who has made time this evening to join us from wherever you sit, gathered into a collective virtual space mediated by these small boxes of mechanical light. And it's on the topic of light that we gather tonight. I've been thinking about, dreaming about light for a very long time, and perhaps an eternity of star time. We are told in the beginning that there was light, though some, like the Cheyenne, remember that before light, the Creator was there. All remember that the original source of light is the sun. And sometimes our relatives call out, sing to, pray to the Father Sun. For some, the sun is a woman. The Yuchi people know themselves to come from the blood of the Sun Mother. The gendering of the sun and the earth and the stars and all that reflects the light is done so that we never forget that we are part of a cosmos of relationships that are born outside of time, outside the limits of human time, and form the parenthetical brackets within which our human experience has been held like the arms of a mother. The human experience of light emerges at the moment of birth when we enter a post-birth world filled with light and shadow, sol y sombra. The time within those brackets, that embrace of the sun and the earth and the moon, a time filled with chaos as we learn our whole lives what it is to be human. In our Chickasaw language, the word for sun and moon are the same, both hanshi, one holding the sky for the other as the moon revolves around the earth, revolves around the sun. Their circular patterns of light and shadow, creating the holy moments of the alignments, the solstices, the eclipses. These moments are the product of millennia of creation by the sun. Each ray of light comes from the sun, takes 10,000 years of birthing and reabsorbing gamma radiation until a photon escapes the embrace of the sun to travel to us in just over 8 minutes. The light travels to us and carries with it the heat that makes our lives possible. The light that makes our planet the delicate balance of night and day and night and day and the cycles that repeat from winter to spring to summer to autumn to winter and again. The sun warms the earth through its light, giving us the seasons, the warmth that keeps us alive. The light brings with it the heat that energizes our entire planet, generating wind as it heats the air at the equator, spurring the hydrologic cycle and spinning up hurricanes and typhoons. The same heat that causes the delicate shimmer on the horizon during a warm summer day. That shimmer is much a retinal effect as it is a ripple in the surface of the temperature across the landscape, akin to the shimmer of energy that activates the spirit, akin to a prayer from the sun to us to be our best light for the world. The concept of light was appropriated by European thought for a bit, entangled with enlightenment and the emergence of a colonialist and capitalist ethos that transitioned the value of the earth from being our mother to a commodity that can be bought and sold. But the sun, the center of our universe, remains elusive, aligned with the deities and creating the holy space for the beings that dance in that shimmer. That light passes over your face, the moon's face, and creates the spectrum of colors that fill our world and our eyes. It is our place as creatives to honor that light, to learn to understand that light, to read it and learn it and to write it. And without learning the lessons of light, our world flattens, reduced to tonal grays and losing our fullness, losing our form. We are humans because of light. We are full because of light. Because from the light grows the plants and the animals that fill us with their energy so that we can feel the light within our bodies. Honoring the light is our way of honoring the sun and fully becoming human. Artists understand that journey. They understand that each light ray took, the journey that each light ray took to arrive on our faces is an act of creation and love and passion by the sun. As artists use that light to create their paintings and their videos, their visions as light rays that dance along the walls, they share the light of their cultures, their philosophies, and their vision. Indigenous artists work with the light. They have inherited this vision from their ancestors, molded from knowledge and beliefs that have been carried since they were received as gifts from the Creator, from the sun, from the moon, and those beings who lived here before we arrived. They work to honor the gifts, to honor their ancestors, and to lay down a light-filled path for those that follow to find their way. The shimmer on the horizon is an invisible barrier that separates the past from the present and from the future. That shimmer is a reflection of who we are, who we have become, who we are in the process of becoming. We must reflect on our choices, our tasks, and account for what kind of light we have become as human beings. This evening, we've been gathered to bring our voices to the light, to consider the role of light in art and in life, and to be for a moment a shimmer on the horizon. I'd like to thank the artists who've given me permission today to use their photographs to illustrate my thoughts, although it looks like maybe Mr. Trosper's image got stuck up there, but also James Pepper Henry, and also Chanupa Hanska Luger. These ideas of reflection are really important, and I think that it's, I wanted to start this evening maybe being a little bit more poetic than I normally tend to be, a little bit more on the scholarly side, but I don't really think that anybody will ever fully understand or know as a human being what the light is, and poetry seemed the best way for us to start this evening. So with that, I'd like to ask each of the artists to take a turn to introduce their thoughts, just for a couple of minutes, and then we have some questions prepared to guide the conversation as much as it may need guidance. So without further rambling, I'd like to ask the artists to take this order and each give a minute to talk about light and to take it in this following turn. Keli, Mashburn, then Yatika Fields, and Marianne Nicolson. So Keli, would you mind starting us off?
Thanks, everyone. It's really good to be here, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity and for this conversation. Light for me is everything as a photographer. You know, I really don't have much to say about light as far as my culture in the old days. I mean, it's kind of, there's a continuity. So, you know, I really can't address that as far as my work goes. But light is everything. There are several different words for it. You know, there's the natural light and then there's the artificial light. But for my work, I think it's also as much about the shadows and the gray areas and, you know, the different kinds of light. Like, for example, if you're meditating, you might search for that clear blue sky or fill yourself with a golden light type of thing. And so for my work from a Native perspective, like to add to the conversation at hand, I would say the way we learn is more experiential. So I think the way we express ourselves is more experiential. So for me, actually being in these places without much post-production in my work is important, because it's you know, photography, and I'll sum up quickly, photography for me it's a universal language. So it doesn't matter if it's crossing tribes or crossing, you know, continents. It's something that we can all understand, and it's a great starting point, I think, for expression. Thank you.
Oi, Hocio. My name is Yatika Fields. Thank you, Pablo and Heather, for leading this conversation. Light for me as a painter is very important, just like both of the artists here that use light, and especially photography and light installations. For me, it's in a study and evaluation of light when I'm painting, every time I'm painting, because I'm trying to discuss and detail dialogue through depth and utilization of color. So it's light in front of darks and kind of creating this ambience and atmosphere through the use of shadows and creating an imaginative light that's hitting somewhere, rather than using the Western concept of light and the buildup of colors. Throughout my process and years, I've learned to kind of create my own And this is from a mentor that I had when I did that landscape painting that Pablo brought up when I did that mentorship and studying in Italy, was how to look at colors and not use blacks, for instance, but watch color move. And at that point, I was also told that I can create my own landscape, create my own atmosphere, and that's my own, and that's okay. And since then, I've just kind of taken it upon my own to create just that. And even with that, I've created my own source of light, and that comes from all angles. So if you're looking at my painting and you see different areas of shadow and you're wondering how can that be if the sun's there and the sun's there, well, that's my own interpretation of living in life, just like that was in your poetry. You know, it's hard to discuss what light is because it's so permanent and impermanent and impervious that it's just so just a part of us and beautiful, but yet it's created in all directions upon our life, whether that's contemporary, historically, traditionally, metaphysically. So.
Beautiful. Marianne?
Hi. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of started off in art school as a photographer, and I think what I was interested in was actually the memory. I was looking to take photographs to kind of capture a sense of community. Was photographing my home community of Kinkum Inlet and my family, and I think also trying to look even further back in archival photographs to recreate memories. I think that in a political sense had been removed from us, or certainly, you know, the Canadian state was trying to erase our sense of memory of who we were. So the work started off with photography, and then it moved in all kinds of directions, and certainly the ceremonial use of light in our traditional gyutsi, our big house, with the fire in the middle, and as the source of light to kind of illuminate the mask dances that we were performing. I was interested in that aspect in terms of like the installations that came later, like the one that is in the exhibition right now. And certainly there was a few different ceremonies where we actually engage with light. My grandfather performed one where he would reach up to touch a beam of light that was coming through the roof of the ceremonial house, and then he would follow it, and it was such a long process, and yet it was so invested. And so I was really interested in those kind of what was behind that engagement with light and the concepts and ideas behind that. It was a way to kind of access our cultural teachings and ways of thinking that I could then translate into contemporary artworks.
Well, that's really beautiful and interesting. And I think that I've been thinking about the role of light and the notion of light. And it's an interesting thing to hear you guys, you know, Keli speaks to the role of light in photography and the spectrum of colors, but also, you know, the gray, right? The gray tones that come and how valuable those are. And Yatika mentioned that artistic interpretation of looking and not trying to confine the light to a single source and thinking about it coming from different directions. And Marianne mentioned about the light as memory, right? And it's kind of interesting because all of those create this sense of fluidity between both light sources and the message that's being carried by the light. And I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on, you've described like kind of like where you came to approaching it from the perspective that you have. And I wonder if you could talk, because each of you use it in a very distinctive way. And for instance, your shift Marianne, if I could start with you, maybe just asking you this question, we might work our way backwards, and to Yatika and then Keli, is that you described starting as a photographer and then seeing the role that the light has in the shadows, right? And that play with the shadows and the interaction, that it's not simply the light passing through the glass, but it's also the reflection of and the shadow that's cast through it across that space. And by an extension, you are creating a much bigger canvas than the physical manifestation of the edged glass. And I wonder if you could talk about how you went from thinking about the photography and the role of light within ceremony, and how you came to this idea of creating these spaces that are bound only by how far the light can travel on its own.
Yeah, I found, so I was making photographs, and there was something really intangible that I was seeking. I was trying to feel something through those images, and then at the same time I was, you know, participating in our cultural ceremonies at home, and the cultural ceremonies were really physically engaging. You know, your physical body is a part of the, you know, whether you're sitting and bearing witness to what is happening or whether you're actually engaged in the ceremony itself as a participant. And I wondered about how, you know, how do you bring those two experiences together? Because I almost felt as if what I was doing with the photography was I was documenting. And then I started studying our language, and it really made the connections happen. It connected what I was what I intuitively was feeling and trying to express through photography, to more of a direct engagement with light and what I wanted to express. And you know, one of the concepts that you know, internally within the Kwakwa language is that there's a stem form which is na, and nala is the word we use for the day, but it's also the word we use for the world. So you could see then the connection between light and space, and time and space, just within that one word. And I wanted to break away from the two-dimensional aspect of the photograph, and yet utilize what it does in a way that engaged with space, that reflected this concept of the day and the world in one word. And this is, you know, it was really through the language. And that's just one example, because as I learned the Kwakwala, my whole entire way of looking at the world shifted and changed. And I wanted to try and integrate that in how I was then expressing artworks, and trying to share that, even though the rest of the world could not know Kwakwala as a language, they could experience something that Kwakwala expresses that I was finding did not exist in the same way in an English fronted world. And so that's really where these pieces, where the physical embodiment of space then becomes integral, and even the concept of the shadow, because for us, our belief system was that in the world, our physical lives were reflected in the lives of the ghosts. So the spirit world was always around us. It's just that we could not see it because our worlds were flipped. So during the day, it was our time, like human beings, we see one another. We don't see the spirits around us. And at nighttime, it flips, and it's the time of the spirits. And so this thing about the shadow, you know, so I started to want to work with shadows as a compositional element with light, that really looked at these concepts of the day and the world, and how we as Kwakwak experience and view the world through our cultural and linguistic lens, because I really wanted to uphold that way of seeing in the world and recreate it in a contemporary sense so that people would not think of it as in the past or away from us. Because when I was looking at the photographs, that's kind of what was happening. So this was a way to kind of bring it back, bring these ways of thinking into the foreground again, and to make them alive and vital, and to also share with the broader world to say, this is an extraordinarily rich, rich, rich way of thinking and being in the world, and we need to value it.
Mm. I feel like your thought about using shadows as a compositional tool is relevant to both Keli and Yatika's work as well. And I really want to just be really clear. I'm hoping we'll get a conversation going and I don't have to guide it. So you guys should jump in as much as you have any thoughts or response to that, because I think thinking about shadows as a compositional device is really powerful. And actually, I think, Keli, that might be very relevant to your work. Do you?
Yeah, I could speak to what Marianne was saying about like a photograph just being like you're just documenting, and I didn't really come up with a way to like address this. It's I continue to document and call on the archive for my current works, but how she wanted to create something besides a document. So I found when I transitioned to filmmaking, which was just collaborating. I had no intention of being a filmmaker or doing anything with, I love the still image, it's the simplicity of it all, it's complete control of perspective. It just seems so simple. I'm in love with it. I've always been in love with film as a medium, but actual moving film was something new for me. And I really found that I was able to create within the photographs, hopefully, was able to create a space, kind of a space, like you need a space for knowledge. You need a space like vessels to contain knowledge, and there needs to be preparation to learn. And if you look at like just movie making, you can sit back on Netflix, turn it on and just consume, consume, consume. But what I'm providing is something, I don't want to say dialogical, but I would say it's inviting. Like, I want you to see yourself. I want there to be space within these works. And I find with the film, actual moving image, the films, when we animate the stills and we actually incorporate video from, iPhones, whatever, like you can use whatever to do that. Like, you don't have like high production cost on any of this. It could be done with a cell phone, I find this is an extraordinary way of expressing oneself, because there are just no rules, there are no rules. And just the amount of knowledge in one image, now we have thousands in like, in like tens of minutes. It's just so much information. So I think by creating the space and using, the shadows, sometimes it might be dark, and like creating moods and capturing emotions and feelings is really my goal. And I can add some documents from the archive to augment that, I hope. But I'm finding that's really, something that I might step away from, just because I don't want someone to just assume because they see a particular symbol that, they may know that story. But I do want someone, I know they can, I focus on landscapes mostly and prairie fires for a while, just the light of the prairie fire and all the symbolism involved with, that. There are just so many layers, like once we get past the still image, like I found, like rather than with the sculpture and the light, like, which is amazing, what Marianne does and what Yatika does, I found it's been so liberating to not just take the still image and animate it, but to even create installations and incorporate still images with it. And hopefully there is a space and there is some kind of transference, maybe you felt something, you might know something, you might relate in a different way, and it's just different ways of knowing and being. And I think connecting with the landscape and realistic photography it's just I love it. I just love it.
Yatika, that use of the shadows is also important to you. You mentioned that in your opening statements. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yes, shadows, like I said, create the depth in the paintings. They really make the work dimensional, and they make the work move depending on where you want it to go. And then you have a lot of play on color studies and compositions, but it can just be only shadows, to start the composition. Or say if I want to start something anew and create fresh, then I'll only start with imagined shadows and then imagine where the source would be coming from to create that depth. Shadows can tell stories, and they can create space, just like what Keli and Marianne have both discussed. For this particular painting right here, Eternal Sun in this exhibition, is fabricated from memory and imagination. It's not one particular landscape that I came across, whereas my usual plein air paintings, when I do go out into the field, are from particular locations that I am looking into the area, looking at the shadows change throughout the day as I paint. And then through that, I'll have a finished piece. But for this particular painting, I wanted to create something that was very new and inspiring from all those memories. And of course, like I said, creating my own atmosphere, creating my own space, and thus creating my own shadow play, but creating my own light sources that came with this. And I'm imagining points in these days that I've came across before that have stuck and struck with me, moments of the sun hitting the trees or the leaves or the shadows that I saw happen and change in front of me, from dark purples to dark blues, so I'm a painter with the brush or a palette knife, and I'm trying to capture these emotions, because really shadow is just source of colors. It's the sun being blocked by an object that is being casted with light upon, and then those colors behind it change every second, from dark reds to dark blues to dark purples. And so I have to decipher which one I'm going to be using to justify the other elements in the canvas to make a whole compositional sound space where light can just exist and feel beautiful and feel all encompassing. So shadows play a very integral part for me. And for this one too, I'm just imagining a place where the shadows are in harmony, right? And that might only be for an instance, just, 1 second out of those moments where the light's traveling from the sun from 1,000 years, right? This is only a moment in time, this image, but yet it's a multitude of moments that I've came across in my investigation and studies and landscapes. So shadows are a huge part for me, and it's just kind of understanding where they lay and where they're going to go, where they're going to fall, because as the sun moves from one direction to the other, they shift just like a clock, right? Just like a sundial. So it's fun because it leaves your imagination guessing. It leaves your creativity on high alert, and there's always room to investigate more with it. It could go on, it's almost like a mystery and a science at the same time.
Mm.
Because it's just
I like the idea of the mystery and the darkness. That's important, I think.
Yeah, well, I know, Keli, you had mentioned in an email prior with this conversation, and we share similar notions and understanding of the Osage, our ways with light and our creation stories. Just like every creation story with a lot of nations, there's similarities, right? There's the land and the earth, and then the sky, and there's shadows and there's light. But for Osages, and like a lot, and I know you mentioned it too, we follow the course of the sun, right? And even the sun was a clan name. So it's so integral and so much a part of who we are as a people that it's just embedded in us. It's in our veins, and
I tried really hard. It was really difficult to kind of tease out, like, how does this affect my art practice when, you know, it's just, I don't know, it's like, how do you speak the language you speak? I feel like, in a way, like, it, you know, it's just how it is. That's, you know, and we had plenty of time to think on light and how we wanted to present it, and all I can say is light is everything, which means so is the darkness and everything in between, you know.
I wonder, Marianne made comment in reference to the role of her language, and maybe making, you know, helping her to find that fulcrum around which her art could kind of adapt to her ideas, by finding the term na that then like connected light and space in that. And I wonder if there's anything, Yatika and Keli, since you're both Osage, I know you're other things too, Yatika, but I wonder if there is any Osage concept that connects those things, the light. And I know it's everything, but are there linguistic connections there that are interesting or informing for either of you?
I would say Wakanda comes to mind as more kind of like an energy, you know, I don't want to say the force, you know, but, you know, like it animates all things, like Wakanda. And one of the names for sun, you know, is like Wakanda of the sun. You know, it wouldn't be like the sun is Wakanda, you know, like Wakanda is like, you know, and that was a big misunderstanding, I believe. Like we have all these different gods. It's like that's not the case at all. There's this, something animates us, you know, there's this idea of the visible world and the invisible world. And there's this concept of reflection that is so important. Everything is based on logic and observation, you know, of course, of the world. And at the time, you know, there wasn't much artificial light, you know, when the language was thriving, you know. So I'm excited to see how our language, now that we have an actual written form now, we've made an orthography, which I love. And I mentioned in some emails, so I, you know, as someone who's not a speaker but who studies the language, like I find so much inspiration in the language, because there's so much knowledge hidden within the language, you know. And just because it was taken from me, like it makes me want it even more. Like, of course, that's what I'm going to, you know, dig into. But I would say, I'm not sure, Yatika, what else you would say about, but I'd say, like, you know, like Wakanda doesn't necessarily mean light, but when you're thinking of light as a particle and a wave and just, you know, the mystery of it all, that's what comes to my mind, is just what's animating us. And it's just the different forms of energy, you know. Wakanda.
I think you're on mute, Yatika.
I kind of cut out, I think, when you're asking that question. What was it in a nutshell, I guess?
What role, or if there are, Marianne gave an example of a term in her language that helped to sort of connect. I use the reference fulcrum, right? Like the center of things that are spinning that energy. There's that moment when things kind of connect, and then the energy becomes bound together. And is there a term or a concept in your language that helped you sort of creatively connect with some of the ideas that have come out in your art?
I think it's kind of probably similar to what Keli is talking about, you know, like the great mystery. And
yeah, that's how I did. I forgot to translate it. It's the mysterious, you know, like the shadows.
Yeah, because it's just, you can only be with it and feel it, you know, and you don't want to try to understand it too much, but just kind of be in harmony with it. Mm. And there is the light and darkness, and that is the reality of things, of the human being and this existence on this earth. And I think it's just kind of understanding those dualities in life and in the moments therein every day, and being humble to the path of the sun. I think is it. So
I know that you guys know I do a lot of research in different cultures, and my research intersects with like different tribal science and sort of philosophical parameters. And I think it's interesting because like when I think of the Navajo, that, you know, a lot of cultures think of the four primal elements or sacred elements, you know, earth, air, wind, and fire, right? And like I think of Osage culture, and there's that, you know, harmony between the sky and the earth, right? And that harmony is what is always sort of mediating where your position is within the world, right? And you're creating your own axis mundi as you move around. And with the ceremonies, there's the drum, and in my tribe, there's the fire that creates that center, and wherever that center gets planted for that moment, that becomes the center of the world, just like the way that the sun works. And so there's that relationship between the sun as the center. I mean, like I think about these things, and it's really profound to think that our cultures, this knowledge of us revolving around the sun is kind of really old, in the same way that like in many plains cultures, when the buffalo migrated north and south, that migration followed the pattern of the sun. And so they understood the bison to have a very delicate and metaphoric relationship with the sun. And that's why the bison is what is used to make those drums that are placed at the center. And we revolve around that drum when we're dancing. But I also think about like the Navajo community and this idea of earth, air, fire, and water, but they have a fifth element. And that's sort of, forgive me, because I really try not to butcher languages, and so I won't do that here, but it's kind of translates, the fifth element sort of translates to like vibration, and it's that energy. And it's that, I think in this same compatibility, it is this idea of that energy, the mystery, the things that make, as I think both all of you kind of mentioned in one way, shape, or form, that energy, that mystery, that is the, you know, also it's just so much bigger. We don't really know. It is just a mystery, and we just honor it and humble ourselves to it. I'm talking a little bit around. I just do want to just say to our audience that we are hoping to have some questions from the audience, and I hope that you guys will use the Q&A or the chat to post some questions up. I hope that the conversation, which I think has been really beautiful so far, might give you something that you might want to ask about, because I know some of these topics that we're making reference to are not necessarily commonly known or understood Western cultural concepts, and I think we could discuss anything that is of particular interest to anyone, but also to ask us further about, and the artists particularly, about their work and how that, you know, there may be something that I don't see and it's curious to you. Others might enjoy that question as well. But I want to come back to thinking about this idea of that energy and that force, and the Wakanda, the creator, the physics, the vibration, the motion of the earth, all of these things are a product, in a manner of speaking, of that. And really the earth spins because of the heat of the sun is spinning the earth, all of those things. And I wonder if you have, can think of other ways that, like, and forgive me, Keli, I might be beating a dead horse, but I think about, like, are there other ways of thinking about this relationship between light and energy and the creator philosophically through your culture that might help people to even understand, like, your own cultural background and relationship to light and how that's expressed through your art? And Marianne, please, I don't mean to be avoiding you at all. And if there's something here you'd like to jump into, I hope you will.
Well, I had a lot to say about the first part of the question,
and then I talked.
I got really excited. Well, so I could go back to the sun and symbolism in the sun, and like it was observed, like it, you know, it moves in one direction, and that direction is true and constant. And so that was something that was really taken and take it as, you know, the movement of, you know, that main source of light, that main life-giving force. You know, it wasn't seen as like a god or anything like that. It was just observed as, you know, a source of light, a source of life. You know, it was recognized, you know, it was sacred. But one thing I think that could translate into today very easily is the way the sun didn't move backwards really affects Osage thinking. And if you can kind of make the connection there with, like, the sun doesn't move in reverse with always move forward, you know, forward thinking and like forward motion, I think you can really kind of see, you know, how the continuity there and how it's just kind of you know, like I can't really speak like how specifically can I reach back into the past, or how specifically do these ideas affect me, when like that is my voice. So, you know, it's really kind of the reflection again, like kind of looking in on myself, trying to figure out like, you know, like what is your voice, and how does your culture affect this, and how does light in particular. You know, I just really, I want people to be able to step in and kind of just maybe like a half degree, if they manage to change a perspective on anything from the space I've created, using this light, you know, like using the different shades of light, the different moods of light, you know, different aspects of light, the movement of light, you know, the absence of light, all the feelings and emotions that, you know, you can evoke when you manipulate the light, or catch different times of day, you know, like daylight, when the sun sets, when the sun rises, like, you know, I mentioned those liminal moments, you know, like you're neither here nor there. It's these in-between magic moments, you know. I want people to be transported there. I want it to be like, you know, like you're not sitting in your office, you're not driving in traffic. You can remember this image. You can wonder if it was the sun. You can wonder about the sunrise, and why is the light, why does it look so crazy? You know, like I just want to inspire a sense of wonder in the viewer, you know. And I think you can create I really want to create like an open mind, I suppose, is what you could say, with, you know, just using space, using light to create a space. I think just, you know, room for you in this landscape. You know, you may be in a city, you may not get a walk around, you may not get a run over the Midi-Pyrenees, you know, but you can, you know, experience like Yatika's painting in that amazing light, or you can walk through the room where Marianne's pieces up, and you are somewhere else, and there's some transference of knowledge. And I think it's very intentional. I think that it's natural. I don't think we as Native artists really need to think about it and consciously do it. You know, I think it's a different way of knowing and being, you know, like just to say it in general terms, it's a different way of knowing and being, and how we're using this light. It's just, you know, I really, I know I keep saying I can't say much on it, and I keep talking about it, but, you know, the light is everything. The shadows, the darkness, it's everything, you know.
Thank you.
Sure.
Marianne, you want to add to that?
Sure. One of the interesting things I've found, like with our stories, so we have a character who's mink, and sometimes, you know, people say in our culture, like either the raven or the mink is what they call trickster. Though I've never seen the word trickster used,
Yeah.
but that's the kind of position that this mink takes. And the mink's name is Tleslagilach, and Tleslagilach actually literally means like Tlesla is the sun, and sun maker. So the name of the mink is sun maker, and he was the son of the sun. And what's always really intrigued me about much of our stories is that, like, Tleslagilach, he would be immoral. Like, he would be on one hand amazing, and on the other hand he would be completely immoral. All in the same person. And it was almost as if, like, in a character you might see night and day, right? Mm-hmm. And I wondered about the lessons in that for us as human beings, you know, that we, you know, sometimes it would frustrate me that you know, Tleslagilach would get away with a lot of what he got away with, but sometimes he would be trying to do something really wonderful and then accidentally ruin it and do something terrible. But on the other hand, he could be equally doing something terrible, and it would become something wonderful. And it's this idea of possibility and choice, and sometimes even chance. And to me, that kind of came across as a philosophy in life. It was not considered so black and white for us. Like, and I thought there was something very beautiful in how we conceived of and engaged with this character who is considered to be the son of the sun. And definitely, like our children, that's one of the first characters that they learn about. And the other one is Utmaeth, which is the raven. But these are the tricksters, what they, I guess you would translate as the tricksters in our culture, that are there to teach us all these different lessons. But I know when I was younger, I wanted it to be more black and white. And now that I'm older, I can see the complexity in it, and that it's actually within the in-between that we really find what we would call nawalaq, which is the supernatural. You know, that specialness, there's something about life that is contained within that symbol, the son of the sun.
You made a comment that I found really interesting right there, and that was that, you know, the contrast between the night and day. I think I share with you that idea of at a time in my life really wanting truth and good and bad and to be so self-evident, you know, and I was really ruminating on it, quite frankly, when I was trying to decide if I was going to go after my doctoral degree, because I had children and I knew that I was going to have to, they were going to have to make sacrifices for me to achieve this. And I was trying to make that decision. And I just, you know, I went and had some blessings made. I had some prayers made for it to work. And I was really feeling, to be perfectly honest, self-indulgent, to be thinking that I should go back to school to get a PhD because, you know, I should be able to do what I needed to do, or maybe my time for that. I was, you know, already in my 40s when I was thinking about that. And I remember standing in our yard, which we live in an urban space, but I often go in our backyard to just pray because it just feels right to be there and just to kind of listen and try to hear. And I was just praying and yearning, just please tell me what I'm supposed to do and make it just be so clear that I won't have any doubts, you know? And what I heard in that moment, and whoever's voice it is, and I think, you know, I think it's self-evident whose voice it is, but I was standing there and it was kind of the springtime, and the wind would come through. And in Oklahoma, we usually get very strong winds actually, but it was a very gentle wind. And it was like I was looking down and I saw the shadow of the tree and the leaves. And in that moment, it became clear to me that all things can be the truth, and all things can be right, and all things can be wrong. And because, do you want to be standing in that light, or do you want to be standing in the shadow? And in Oklahoma, there's 6 months out of the year you want to be standing in the shadow, and then there's 6 months out of the year that you really want to be standing in the light. And so it all became clear to me that the answer had to take me making a decision of what I just wanted, and then using my will and moving forward, and then doing my best to honor my community, honor my family, honor the sacrifices that were going to be made, and to do it well, as my grandparents say, do your best. And so that was kind of how I came to the decision to go back to school. But your comment of wanting it to be so clear one way or the other, but the truth is that both are right. Standing in the shadows and standing in the light are both right, and they can also both be wrong. And it's just a matter of how we approach it and how it is within the context of everything around it, which I think is very evident in the artwork too, right? Like the role of shadow and light, you need them both. Keli needs that camera lens, whether it's a photograph or a video camera, has to take in some light, or there is nothing, right? Without that source of light at some level, there is no image. And so whether you're looking for the bright part of the day or the shadows or the changing color of, which I think is just so beautiful when the light becomes very gentle in your camera lens and becomes almost dissolved into just space and being, which is really beautiful. It is very reliant that light existed at all, or else nothing happens. And like Yatika's paintings would be all black. If there was no light, there'd be no color, right? So I just think about these things and just, I don't know, I think that was really beautiful. I just feel like I'm talking too much again. So, but on that path, I want to just think about like this idea of light, and I made some comments at the very beginning about, you know, creating a light-filled path for those that follow. And I wonder if you guys would like to, I don't know, what do you think? How important it is for your work? Keli, you spoke to that Osage ethos of always moving forward, which I think is also about adapting to what you have, taking your culture with you, however that is, whatever the enunciation of that is.
Yeah, solid foundation in the past and those that came before you, but of course not lingering and stagnating, but taking, you know, what works and what serves, you know, you in on your path, you know, whether it be in the shadows or the light. You know, I think it's the whole, is there good and evil, or is there just like some ways there might be a better way about going about this, you know? This might be a better path than this path. But I really like how you discuss that with the
So
light.
how important is it for you guys in your work, all of you, to be thinking about what you're laying down as a foundation for the future?
I'll go. Yeah, I mean, it's super important because, you know, as we're working, we're just moving forward from our predecessors, our ancestors, but also our influences, you know, who are notably more so, you know, the other Native artists who have come before us to create work, who have thought about these ideas, you know, who have been tied to their lineage and their ceremonies and their traditions and incorporated it into their work. Whereas now we are kind of encompassing the technologies that we have to kind of take it even further, but yet are still bringing our knowledge of our culture into play the same as the artists before us. So we're just kind of adding more, I wouldn't say decorations, but just more additions to something that we've been thinking about, you know, and we're making work, we're making contemporary work, we're making artwork that's hanging in exhibitions and museums. But yet when we go back to our ceremonial grounds or our reservations or wherever we're from, you know, we're dressing in our native dress, we're dancing around a drum or a fire, and we're being taken back to, you know, a past. And then we're coming back to our studios, and whether it's in a dark room or it's working with glass, or I'm adding a paintbrush with paint to a canvas, I'm carrying those histories with me, but yet I'm in 2020 adding to this information that I'm having now. But by having this conversation and by making work every day and being diligent about it and being thoughtful about this process, I'm laying down new information that connects my past and today's information, so that the artists that haven't been born yet, Indigenous artists, Native artists, can, you know, look at us and feel empowered to take it even further. Mm-hmm. You know, because just as the sun and light does, you know, it's a bridge of time, and that's what this artwork does for us. You know, the possibilities. Like I love what Marianne said. You know, the possibility, the choice and chance, and that's everything in art. You know, if we allow it as a community, as a city, as a country, to investigate and hold art to its most power, we can do some really beautiful things with it. But yet we haven't even got there yet as a nation, as a people, as a community. You know, we're only kind of revolving around the corridors of what art really can do. But as artists, I think it's important, and just by participating in it every day, by making work, we're influencing the generations to come.
I think it's true. I really do think about what I put out there. I think my production is a bit limited. I have so much I want to put out, but I tend to overthink it a bit because it is so important to me. Like, who's going to see it? What impression are they going to have? Like, it matters so much to me for, for everyone, like not just my Osage people to be able to, see or feel these things I'm trying to convey. I think it's more important than ever for people that aren't just my Osage people or aren't just Indigenous people, to feel the ways that I'm feeling, But I especially incorporate the language and the orthography. Osages have always been contemporary. They've always had this saying, move to a new country, and at this time we moved to a new country. And what they're saying, this is another idea of how it doesn't translate. They're not saying, oh, let's pack our little bags and go, like what they mean is we have to reorganize because what we're doing isn't working. What we have to add some things and subtract some things. We have to regroup, we have to rethink it, and we have to move forward in a way, that works. And that's what they meant by, we moved to a new country. And at this time, another time, if you read The Flesh, like everyone, you got to read The Flesh. You always see these references to moving to the new country, and I think that's important. I want to carry the language with us because of all that it has. All the treasures that are hidden in there. That they're there. It's there for us. We just have. It's right there for us. And I think it's extraordinary. And I want to encourage the young people. To you don't have to limit yourself. Use your language, don't use your language. You're expressing yourself. There's no wrong or right way to do it. And you don't have to have an unlimited budget. Like I was saying, you can do what I've done on an iPhone. You don't need a Leica. I have a Leica lens and I love it, but you don't need that Leica glass to create something amazing, and it's just like Yatika said, with the technology of today, especially it's so easy for for the platform, our platform, it's just amplified our voices. And I think it's so important for natives to express themselves. We shouldn't be such an exotic commodity. It is what it is. But I think it's just wonderful that we have forums like this, and we have so many people just on this screen with these terminal degrees, kudos to you. That's so important. It's so important, I know, academically, I don't think I have the discipline. I just want to do what I want to do, how I want to do it, and that's okay. But yeah, I think it really is important what we put out there. I think education is important. Osages have always stressed education and demanded formal education. It's just, we have to move forward. We have to come up with new words. We're going to have to come up with new words in our language. And it's really exciting. It's a really exciting time, to be something.
So I want to jump in real quick and just acknowledge that we're running a little bit over time, but I wanted to invite the panelists to maybe, do you want to answer a couple questions from the Q&A section? Maybe dip in there a little bit. We've inadvertently answered a few, especially with a previous question by Jennifer Scanlon, the curator of the Bright Gold and Haze exhibition, asking about what kind of spaces are created using light, whether they're a physical space, an actual space, or an emotional space. And I think, Keli, you touched on that a little bit. Yatika, you did as well. I think, Marianne, you also talked a little bit about that with regards to the kind of installation work that you make. And also these ideas about continuing on that question about how you feel about people entering the space and what their experience is going to be versus the kind of messages that you are thinking of as you create the work.
So I'm looking at the Q&A, Pablo, and I see that Sol Young is asking a question specifically to Marianne. She says, you mentioned how in your culture, daytime is the realm of us humans and nighttime is the realm of the spirits. In your work, the shadowy projections come from the light and seem to envelop and surround the audience and expanding beyond the contained imagery surrounding the source of light. What are your thoughts on how light reaches into and expands beyond itself into the darkness and shadow? I don't know if you want to take that question on, and then there's a question for Yatika, and then one other, maybe.
Sure. One of the things that with the installation work is this idea of balance between elements. And so, there's this ephemerality that is a kind of a descriptor, I guess, of what light might be or how it is perceived. And then there's physicality. And I think we as human beings tend to, we have a physical body and we live in the physical world, but there are many things we just don't understand and we want to come to understand. And one of the things that I was looking at in terms of contemporary life is that it seemed with the outside society that there was this real investment in the physical world, you know, things that money could buy and what our bodies looked like. And I was, you know, considering that in relationship to the ephemerality of light and the spirit, right? And it seemed to me that amongst us, the Kwakwaka'wakw, when I was growing up, there was still a really strong sense of the value of spirit, and that it carried as much weight, if not more, than our physical bodies did. And one of the things I was really, really, really grateful for was the old people would see us not so much as our limited life, like I'm born at such a time and I die at such a time, but they would see us as an extension. So we were an extension of their parents and grandparents. So they're saying, oh, we're being reborn, we're being reborn. And so that level of ephemerality, that it diminished the value of the physicality, because the body was just something you were occupying. It was the spirit that had that strength and solidity about it, which is the opposite in this modern world. And so I wanted to create these pieces that would uphold the sense of the spirit and the ephemeral and give it as much value as the physicality of the glass, the carved glass. People are very drawn to the carved glass, but really what makes those works are the shadows and the light, which is just an ephemeral aspect. And so in a way, I was trying to map this old way of thinking into the contemporary form. I don't know if that really answered the question, but it just
I think it
is
did.
what
That
came
was
to mind.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Marianne, I remember the first time, well, I think I'd been aware of your work before, but the first time I actually saw it was at that Transformers show in New York City. And I remember walking into that space and just being filled with the feeling of your piece that was in there, placed in the middle, yet emanating the light and the shadows, and then kind of setting and being with it. It was a beautiful exhibition, and I really enjoyed being with your piece there. In that.
Thank you.
Yatika, you also have a couple of questions from the Q&A as well, specific to your work. Shannon Lockwood is asking that she's very drawn to the marbleized look of the rocks in the piece, particularly one in the lower right quadrant. And I wanted to know, is that a significant part of the work for you? Because there's so much movement in the piece, but the rock looks so stable.
Yeah, you know, when I'm painting, I'm observing and I'm taking in all the qualities of everything that I'm painting, whether that's the growth of the grass or the weeds or the trees as the leaves fall. And then you have the stability of the rocks, you know, that are placemakers and that have been formed from the winds because they're stationary, yet everything around it decays and grows over it, yet the rock stays present. And the rocks are pieces in my paintings that become placeholders for composition, and they make the composition, so they are going to be sturdy just as they would be in nature. And marbleized, I leave it up to the viewer to interpret these elements and these pieces, whether that's seeing it as marbleized or abstracted or whatever, you know, a memory from their own upbringing or their own past in life. Yeah, those are just kind of placemakers that are kind of reflections of the real life that you would see in nature, pretty and stable beings that have weathered the time.
Beautiful. There is a question about the, Scott Heskett asks, in continuation of the discussion of space the artist piece creates, how did the artist feel regarding the consumption of their work, creating their own experience? He continues, as the consumer of the piece of art over the curator or to crisp of a scene become, Can you interpret that, Pablo? I'm trying to see what the question is. I'm sorry.
I'm reading it as well. I think it's basically, just to summarize it, it looks like it's asking this question of the experience that the person has may have nothing to do with the story that's trying to be told through the artwork. And is it more important to tell your story, or to create this space that the consumer of the art can have their own experience.
Keli, since you kind of spoke to this a little bit, and Yatika and Marianne have had another question, why don't you answer this one?
Okay. Yes, I know this fellow. But I can't translate that. Paula did a really good job. God. Okay. Well, I think that like I kind of touched on it earlier. Like I don't really like, you can just sit there and maybe consume it, but like maybe my pieces would look a little boring. I really don't know. It's my hope that what I've created like will allow the person to enter a different headspace, you know, like you're not physically going to step into the photograph, but like you can travel with your mind. There's this whole idea of traveling with the mind, and I have a whole project working on this idea of traveling with the mind. I'm hoping with these landscapes that everyone can relate to the landscape. And so I think I would shoot landscapes anyway. So there's this whole like, you know, like the body and the landscape, you know, that this whole separate conversation. But as far as like the work in the show, I would say that the landscape is just a starting point. And it's my hope that they will be able to step into this story, and whether or not it has anything to do, you know, with them in their mind, you know, like it does. Like we're all experiencing nature, you know, like I might have a different relationship to it, you know. So if you can step into my landscape, like we might come a little bit closer to some kind of understanding, or you might see something a little differently. And that's my hope. And I hope it's a two-way street. I hope that I've been able to create this, you know, I hope I've been able to like remove the distractions, and like they can have the sense of the light, they can have the sense of the space. And you know, it doesn't have to be a particular time. You know, I made it a point, like any film that I'm going to do, it's non-linear. I think I'm gonna have to break that rule in the future, but like it's non-linear. You know, there's space and time, and there's just different ways that I think natives relate to it. So hopefully I can create something from my own experience that will elicit some kind of interaction, you know, with the viewer. I don't think it would be beneficial if it was just passive. I think it just might, you know, just like here's the pretty flower would be, you know, I hope it's a little bit more than that. But if it is just that, if it's just a pretty sunset, that's okay too, you know. But I definitely am hoping that they will have their own story within that landscape, you know. I mean, there's room for them there. Like that's how it was made.
Yeah.
In my case.
Thank you, Keli. So I'm going to stop annoying my coworkers and go ahead and cut this off, because we definitely went way past time. But I do apologize to the people in the Q&A that we didn't get to. We didn't get a chance to answer every single question, but I really appreciate everyone's input, and I'm really happy with the questions that came in a row.
It was good to meet everyone.
I hope, to Kelly's words, I hope everyone's experience with this is something they can walk away with and maybe create their own ideas of how to engage this type of art and what's required to engage art of this complexity with this kind of like cultural context. So once again, thank you all for being a part of this panel. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And with that, we just want to say thank you to all of our attendees and all of our panelists and everyone at Oklahoma Contemporary who made this possible. So have a great night, and we will see each other soon.
Thank you. Take care. Be safe.